Chapter 6, Cognitive Development in Infancy. We're going to start talking about Piaget's theory of cognitive development. So I'm not going to cover the whole theory because I have videos for you to watch that go into more depth and show you examples and footage of actual infants. So that'll be more helpful than me just like explaining the textbook to you. So I am just going to go over a couple things and then I'll have the videos linked on Blackboard for you. So again, we're talking about Piaget here. So Piaget sought to discover how children at different points in their development think about the world and how systematic changes in their thinking occur. His theory is a general unifying story of how biology and experience sculpt cognitive development. So as you'll see in your textbook, he has different stages. His stages start at infancy and go through adolescence. Um, this book, textbook and class ends at adolescence, but if you were taking a lifespan class, you would find out that cognitive development doesn't stop at adolescence. So we continue to develop into adulthood as well, but for the purposes of this class, we're stopping at adolescence. And that's where Piaget thought that cognitive development stopped as well. So there are different cognitive processes Piaget has listed in your textbook. So Piaget thought that children actively construct mental structures to help them adapt to the world. He proposed that children accomplish adaptation through processes such as schemes, assimilation, accommodation, organization, equilibrium, and equilibration. So the first one is schemes. Schemes are actions or mental representations that the developing brain creates to organize knowledge. In Piaget's view, behavioral schemes, or for infancy, physical activity, characterize infancy. So behavioral schemes is referring to some kind of physical activity, and he thought that in infancy that's really all you have. And you'll see as we progress through the lifespan that these schemes get more complicated as the child gets older. So an example of what Piaget is talking about here would be that an infant sucks on everything that touches its lips. And so the scheme is that they have a behavior of sucking. So in the reflexes section, you learned about the different reflexes infants are born with, and sucking was one of them. So if something touches their lips, their automatic reflex is to suck on it. And as they do this, they develop a scheme that, well, when I suck on things, I sometimes get food, and that becomes, or pleasure of some kind, and that becomes a scheme, a behavior scheme. Next, we have assimilation and accommodation. Assimilation occurs when children incorporate new information or experiences into existing schemes. So we have our sucking scheme where anytime the infant has something that touches their lips, they start to suck on it. And when they incorporate something new, such as, let's say, they get a new toy, and so they start to suck on it, that's assimilation because they have a new experience or a new object, and they're assimilating that into their current scheme. Accommodation occurs when children adjust existing schemes to take in new information and experiences into account. So with assimilation, you're incorporating something into an existing scheme. With accommodation, you're adjusting an existing scheme to take on new information and experiences into account. So in my toy example, accommodation would occur when the infant realizes that the toy doesn't provide me any food when I suck on it, so maybe I should try something else. So they're changing their scheme. I have a video linked on Blackboard that gives you another good example of this from the movie Bambi. So you can watch that and kind of point out to yourself where the assimilation and accommodation is occurring in that example. Next, we have organization. Organization is the grouping of isolated behaviors and thoughts into a higher order system. This is how children make sense of the world. So you have isolated behaviors and thoughts, and obviously you have to put them together and organize them in your brain. Think of it as like you have little boxes in your brain that explain different things. An example would be that a child not an infant, but maybe an older child might have a vague idea on how to use a hammer, and therefore they may also have a vague idea of how to use other types of tools. And as the child learns to use each one, he relates those uses to the current knowledge. So he's adding into those boxes essentially. Okay, next, according to Piaget, children constantly assimilate and accommodate as they seek cognitive equilibrium. Equilibration is the term Piaget used to describe the mechanism by which children shift from one stage of thought to the next. The result of these cognitive processes, according to Piaget, is that individuals go through 4 stages of development. And again, those are the stages that you can read about in your textbook, and I have a video of the first one, which is called the sensory motor stage. And this stage is from birth until age 2. And there's 6 substages in that one, so that's why I'm not going to talk through it all. You can watch the video and read about that in your textbook. So take a moment to go ahead and go watch that and then come back for the rest of the lecture because I'm going to talk about evaluating the sensory motor stage. So after you've watched it, we're going to evaluate it. So recent research suggests that the infant's cognitive world does not seem as neatly packaged as Piaget portrayed, and some of Piaget's explanations for the cause of change have been debated. Much of the new research suggests that Piaget's view of sensory motor development needs to be modified. So one specific issue is perceptual development and expectation. So research suggests that infants' perceptual abilities are highly developed much earlier in infancy than Piaget would have predicted. Research also suggests that infants develop the ability to understand how the world works and form expectations about events at an earlier age than Piaget thought. And then there was another issue with with nature and nurture. So it's generally agreed that Piaget underestimated the early cognitive accomplishments of infants, and that both nature and nurture are involved in infants' cognitive development. So in conclusion, researchers conclude that Piaget was not specific enough about how infants learn about their world and that infants are more competent than once thought. And again, that was the sensory motor stage is the first stage you can watch. I have this link on Blackboard for you to watch. Okay, so the next thing we're going to talk about in relation to cognitive development is infant intelligence. So this may be something that you're not really familiar with because it might, when you think of intelligence, you might not think of being able to measure it in infants because our typical definitions of intelligence have to do with taking tests or solving problems, and infants can't even speak yet. They can't communicate with us. So how exactly are we going to measure infant intelligence? So we've talked about some of these skills before. I'm going to go ahead and put them all up on the screen. Some of them I've already went over. The developmental quotient, this one, Jessel developed an instrument to sort out abnormal babies from normal ones. And the DQ score, which is a developmental quotient, differentiates between normally developing babies and babies with atypical development from ages 2 months to 30 months. So some things that this measures, there's 4 domains. It measures motor skills, language use, adaptive behavior, or otherwise called alertness or exploration, and then lastly, personal and social development. So it measures not only cognitive development, but also physical development and emotional social development as well. And again, the whole point of the test is to differentiate normally developing babies from atypical development. So it's kind of like a surface level to determine if you're developing normally or not. Next, Bayley Scales of Infant Development. This is also a measure of development for infants between the ages of 2 to 30 months. This one concentrates on mental and motor abilities. So it concentrates on your senses, the perception of the baby's memory, their ability to learn, their problem solving, and their language. And then it also focuses on fine and gross motor skills. These skills allow us to see if the infant falls behind or is ahead of his same age peers. The scale is useful for identifying infants that are substantially behind and need immediate intervention. However, these scales are not predictive of future intelligence. So again, for Bayley Scales of Infant Development, we have a concentration on mental and motor abilities. It's most useful to determine if an infant is substantially behind where they should be for their age and if they need immediate intervention. And you cannot use these skills to predict future intelligence. So if you gave a 5-month-old baby, this measure and they were behind, you can't then say that at age 30 they're also going to be behind, because it doesn't predict future intelligence. It just tells you where the baby is at that point in time. So language development was one of the domains listed on those scales of intelligence. So let's talk a little bit about how language develops in infancy. Babies begin linguistic acquisition through crying, cooing, babbling, and gestures. So not language as you would think of it now, where we speak to each other, but babies do have language, just not words yet. So first, recognizing language sounds. Well before they begin to learn words, infants can make fine distinctions among the sounds of language. Young infants are more sensitive to the phonemes of all languages than are older infants. And phonemes are the sounds in a language. So like in English, the ah sound would be a phoneme. Different languages will have different phonemes, and babies, infants can recognize phonemes from all different kinds of languages, not just their own. But they start to then hone in on the sounds that are important for their language that's spoken in the home, or wherever they spend the most time. So I have this video linked on Blackboard as well that goes into a little bit more of how babies can recognize sounds from all different kinds of languages that we wouldn't be able to recognize as adults unless you speak that language. Babies produce a number of vocalizations to practice making sounds, to communicate, and to attract attention. Baby sounds go through the following sequence. Crying, which can signal different things, cooing at 1 to 2 months old, and then babbling at around 6 months of age. Babbling is strings of consonant-vowel combinations, so it's not, I'm sure you know what babbling is, and it sounds like gibberish, but it really is them trying to communicate. They're trying to imitate the sounds that they hear around the house or at school, daycare, whatever. So again, I have another video here that you can find on Blackboard that's a really cute example of babbling. Next, we have gestures. So infants start using gestures such as showing and pointing at about 8 to 12 months of age. Pointing is considered by language experts an important index of the social aspects of language. An infant that does not use pointing may have problems in their communication system. Failure to engage in pointing characterizes many autistic children as well. Okay, and then we move on to first words. So first words are usually related to people and things in the baby's immediate environment. Receptive vocabulary considerably exceeds spoken language vocabulary in infancy, so this means that they can understand words long before they can actually speak them. At 5 months old, they can recognize their own name. Once the first word is spoken, a vocabulary spurt, which typically occurs at around 18 months, leads to a rapid increase of vocabulary. First words are typically what we call hollow phrases, or one-word utterances that depend on the particular context in which they are used to determine the meaning. For example, the child may say mama, but could mean mom pick me up or where is mom. So essentially a hollow phrase is just one word, and you have to examine the context of the word to determine the meaning. Cultural differences are revealed in vocabulary development, such as at the age at which children start to use nouns. Chinese Mandarin-speaking infants are more likely to use verbs as their first words. Still sticking with first words, we also have underextension and overextension. So underextension is using words too restrictively, which is really common in babies. So they may say blankie, which only refers to a specific blanket, but not all blankets. And then overextension is using words too broadly. This is also very common for babies. So they may say kitty to refer to all four-legged animals, not just kittens. Okay, and then once they start with saying more than one word, we move on to two-word utterances. This is where children produce two-word utterances, typically around 18 to 24 months. To convey meaning, the child relies heavily on gesture, tone, and context. Telegraphic speech is the use of short and precise words. So this occurs when words not critical to the message are left out. So instead of saying, I want to eat cake, the child might say, eat cake. So the next thing to talk about with language is infant-directed speech. So typically in class, I would have a volunteer read the sentence, do you like the apple dumpling? And then I would have somebody else volunteer and read it as if they were saying it to a baby. So something like, do you like the apple dumpling? So you can see the clear difference. You can't see my face, obviously, but you can hear the difference in my voice, my tone. I went into a higher pitch if I was going to be talking to a baby. I kind of dragged out some of the sounds. If we did this in person, the volunteer usually smiles, maybe kind of hunches over, like they're as if they're leaning down talking to a baby. So that's called infant-directed speech. This is where we increase our pitch and focus on simple words and phrases. We draw out sounds that are important in our language. And that's how babies learn sounds in their language, is because when you draw them out, they know to focus on those sounds. Those sounds are important. Let's say for English, so those are the sounds I need to focus on trying to learn and repeat myself. So this actually happens all over the world. We see this in every culture, the use of infant-directed speech. So it's really interesting. And I have a video that goes a little more in depth about this on Blackboard as well. I didn't realize there was another slide, but yeah, so this is just the definition of infant-directed speech, style of speech that characterizes most of the verbal communication directed toward infants. And again, you can watch this video on Blackboard.